Hello and welcome to TSAM London Digital. My name is Andrew Kerry and I am the Managing Director for Fox and Media who run the TSAM series of events. Before we begin our keynote being delivered by PwC, I'd like to just take a minute to say a huge thanks to what is now over 1,300 buy-side professionals who are joining us online today for the first of 3 days of interactive buy-side content for the investment management community. It goes without saying that none of this would have been possible without the hard work from our sponsors. So I'd like to say a large thanks to our platinum sponsors, PwC, Big Tin Can, Future, and FactSet. They've been working really hard behind the scenes to help put this together. So an enormous thanks from everyone here to all of them. I'd also like to say a thanks to our gold sponsors who helped us put together the agenda and who we've worked with for a number of years. So thank you to IBM, Promontory, Automation Anywhere, AutoRec, Charles River, and CME Group. Before we start our keynote presentation, I know that I'm already working with a number of our sponsors, a number of our buy-side professionals on our next upcoming events. So just a quick note on them. I hope that you're able to join us for our next digital summit, which is the TSAM Digital East Coast, which is taking place in July. We then have 2 deep dive sessions that get really under the bonnet of particular streams of TSAM. So we have our TSAM Regs and Compliance taking place in August, and our TSAM Investment Operations taking place in September. We then go back to a full TSAM experience with our Toronto event in October taking place digitally. And then we round off the year with our 2 roadshow events. So the first of our roadshows will be our Chicago and Miami events, which take place in November. And our final roadshow of the year will be stopping off in both Singapore and Hong Kong. So that's enough from me. I'd like to now hand over to PwC for the first of our presentations of this TSAM London Digital event. Thanks for joining us.
Hello everyone, my name is Andrew O'Callaghan. I'm a partner in PwC. I lead our global advisory practice for asset and wealth management. I'm based in Dublin in Ireland. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Carol Stubbings from our UK firm and Dave Foss from our US firm. Carol and Dave, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thanks Andy. So I'm Carol Stubbings. I'm a partner in our London office. I lead our global people and organisation practice, and I've been thinking about the future of work for a very long time.
Tremendous. Thanks, Carol.
And I'm Dave Foss, and I'm a partner in the United States, based in Boston, and I serve a number of global clients. And in the last 8 weeks, I've been leading our firm's efforts on addressing COVID-19 for the asset and wealth management industry.
Great. Thanks, Dave. So let's jump into it. When I was originally due to give a keynote message at the TSAM conference in London, the original plan was to talk about the future of the industry, both from the opportunities perspective, and we see many of them for this great industry, but also the challenges that the industry is facing, and we've done some reports and some research on this. That was over 2 months ago, and what a different perspective we're all facing today as we've worked our way through the crisis. In many ways, the opportunities and the challenges that the industry faces haven't changed. Ultimately, this industry is about serving the end investor through good times and bad, delivering results and meeting expectations, and as best as possible exceeding those expectations for the benefit of the end investor and in turn for broader society. So in many ways, this current crisis that we're going through, in my view, should be seen in that context. And some of the remarks I would have made in London a couple of months back will still be relevant today. Indeed, the industry, it is known, and hopefully is known, for taking a long view on generating returns for retirees and other investors. So I feel that's worth saying up front, that many of the opportunities and challenges are maybe more pronounced. Certainly the challenges are, but the fundamentals of the industry in many ways remain the same. Well, let's start with what we have seen over the past two months. How have we in PwC navigated the crisis? And then we're going to move on to how have we helped our clients. And when we all talk about our asset and wealth management clients, it runs the full industry, from the end investor, be that insurance investors, asset owners, pension plans, right through to the asset managers themselves, various intermediaries, and then very importantly, the asset servicers and the custodian banks, whose operational resiliency has been key to how the industry has navigated the past couple of months. So I'm going to give a very short perspective from a European purview, and then ask Dave and Carol to comment from their perspectives as well. Short message on the past 2 months is that the industry has stood up very well. It has not been without challenges. In fact, we have seen in many cases with clients huge stress on their systems, on their people, and certainly on their technology. And I sometimes characterize this as saying, we're clearly going through a health crisis. It's also a financial crisis. We're seeing the volatility in the financial markets. But on top of that is a strain on technology that we did not see clearly during the financial crisis. So it's a combination really of three different challenges. Pulling all those together, putting them up on a chart, if you like, means that the day-to-day has been very challenging. And I would say the area we've been most involved with for clients in Europe has been the day-to-day delivery of what they're required to do. And that covers starting back to the full spectrum of the industry. For investors, are they getting the right information? Has their shareholder trade, be it a subscription or redemption, has that gone through on time? Has it gone to the right place? We've seen heightened fraud risk, cyber fraud risk in recent weeks. So ultimately the protection of investors and their funds has been crucial. How have the investment managers navigated the volatile markets? Have they been able to execute as they would like to? And then has the vendor community, the asset servicer community, including custodian banks, who have a hugely important role as large regulated entities through all of this, have they been able to adapt and deliver? Clearly they have multinodal, if you like, delivery centers around the world. And so how have those delivery centers held up? And we've been very involved in helping clients with BCP planning, communication to regulators. The role of regulators has been very important, but ultimately coming down to where I started, which is sustaining as best as possible a BAU delivery model for clients throughout all of this. And the last thing I'd say, that work has been largely focused on the consulting part of our business, but equally there have been many tax questions, restructuring type questions, and clearly the audits that we do for our clients has been very, very important in terms of conversations we've had with our audit clients. So I'll stop there. That's a helicopter view from a European perspective. Overall, despite the challenges, I'm very impressed, frankly, with how the industry has stood up and navigated the past 2 months. Dave, do you want to share your perspective from the US?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I mean, I'd echo your comments. I think the great news for asset managers and the whole ecosystem is just how resilient it has turned out to be. I mean, the investments that managers and their service providers, whether it be custodian banks, fund accountants, transfer agents, data providers, their professional services firms, you know, the investments in technology have been immense in the last few years and have been proven to be needed. I mean, I don't think anybody's business continuity plan had ever planned for everybody in the firm globally to be working from home. And, you know, certainly business continuity dealt with regional issues like weather or you know, geopolitical issues that could occur in various regions, but never did we think that we'd have everybody working from home, and yet the industry has stood up. So, you know, I think it's a great testament to the amount of investment this industry has made towards that. It hasn't come without their challenges. I mean, I think the fraud risk has increased. We're seeing a massive amount of account takeover fraud attempts by bad actors. You know, with investors moving more to online transactions rather than in-person transactions, certainly in the retail space, that has created an opportunity for bad guys to do bad things. And so, you know, vigilance around managing fraud in this environment has been really important for managers and for their providers. We're seeing an increased need for investment in that area as we go forward. But I think the large story, despite the financial crisis and health crisis we're in, the asset managers really pulled together to serve their customers really, really well in these last 8 weeks.
Yeah, fully agree. It's great to see that's universal, Dave. Carol, from your perspective, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we've had the biggest social experiment of home working. And I think what's really interesting is, you know, a lot of organizations are hugely surprised and quite delighted about their ability to get people effectively working from home. I think what we've had in the past is, you know, a lot of organizations have allowed home working, but it's been more of an exception than a norm. And we've had a very presenteeism culture. And by that, I mean, kind of people expect high visibility in the office, and there's a, you know, kind of low trust around, could people really effectively work at home? That's really been blown out the water. And I think a lot of the CEOs and CFOs and HRDs that I talk to, you know, a lot of them have never really worked at home for any great length of time. And actually, they're realizing and recognizing that it does come with some huge benefits. So, you know, I do think through this crisis, we will see some new emerging ways of working. And I do think what COVID-19 is going to do is really accelerate workforce transformation. I mean, there's no doubt that workforce transformation has been accelerated anyway over the last kind of, you know, 5 to 10 years with the introduction of technology. And we've also had a number of knocks, right? We've had climate, we've had floods, we've had fires, we now have COVID-19, but I can imagine other things are going to come up that actually externally are beyond companies' control. So creating an ability to work very agile and creating an environment where people work quite differently, whether that be at home or clusters or whatever that might look like. A lot of companies are now starting to think, you know, this isn't a short-term thing, right? We're going to be working like this for quite a long period of time. So how do we sustain the working practices we have today? How do we embed some of that thinking into what the future of our workforce might look like? And I think, you know, what's been really interesting for me is how organizations, the ones that have really invested in the collaboration tools and upskilling their people, are really the ones that have seen the benefit. The companies that are really struggling are the ones that haven't invested in those. But actually, we're talking to them, they've realized that critically, that's kind of that investment needs to go to the top of the food chain when things start to turn around, because they realize that in order to be effective, they need to get their people working remotely and productively in a way that maintains business as usual.
Carol, that's really interesting. Do you have some examples of, so I think that contrast between those who, even in advance of this, had invested in their people, in the skills of their people, in the technology that those skills will benefit from. What have you seen that works well, and maybe that hasn't worked so well, and clients who really struggled, as you say, to adjust?
Yeah, I mean, you know, well, ourselves actually, I mean, we invested hugely in technology a couple of years ago. And I remember at the time globally, there was a bit of pushback saying, do we truly need to invest all of this money in collaborative technology globally? Now, I think we can all say that we are massively relieved and absolutely delighted we made that investment. And actually, we went from 240,000 people globally working in offices to working remotely pretty much overnight. And you know, the technology held up brilliantly. I think if I look at some of the clients I talk to where they have invested, they've had the same experience as us. You know, it takes a while to get people used to kind of how they're working, but actually, you know, for them, it's really more around ensuring people have the right support. Not just from a collaborative technology perspective, but their managers know how to manage and lead in a very ambiguous world and do that remotely. So they've required different leadership skills. And those companies that have recognized that you need to pivot your leadership style, that you need to think about the broader human traits that are hugely important in crisis like this, you know, the emotional intelligence, the empathy, the adaptability, the resilience of people. and really helping people make sure that they're kind of nurturing and fostering those are the ones that have seen an uptick. I mean, I talked to one organisation last week and a couple of things stood out for me. The first one was that they anticipated, they've done some analysis, they actually think productivity has gone up by something like 25% for a specific group of their people. And, you know, but the other thing for me is actually they've been able to cut through a lot of the governance and a lot of the committees to get things done. They've needed to get things done at speed. And one CEO was saying, you know, something that would normally have taken us as a company, you know, 6 months to get agreed and get executed has actually taken us 2 weeks, because actually we needed to do it. We moved on, we made the decision and we made it happen. So, you know, it's not just about getting people productive, it's also thinking about all of those layers that grow up through organization as they become more mature. How do you cut through those, you know, without compromising on your operational resilience, without compromising on kind of your risk taking, but actually how do you make decisions and execute much quicker and faster? But on the other side, we've seen companies that have really, really struggled to the extent where they can't actually service their clients properly, where they can't physically get laptops to enough people. And that's put them back quite significantly. And they've really struggled to kind of get up and running as quick as some of their competitors. So there's a real, you know, there's a real balance and a real kind of challenge in the market as well.
Yeah, I think, Andy, if I could add a point here, I think it's clear that we're likely to see more and more of a hybrid model going forward from this industry, instead of it being all in person and you know, remote being an exception, as Carol just said, but to be much more a balance of the two, and what that might look like is going to be different, I think, for each organization. But it's part of the strategic conversation one needs to have. You know, one of the hallmarks of this industry is really the review and supervision and apprenticeship model that really exists throughout all of the members of this ecosystem, and it about mentoring and using the experience of those of us to pass along to the next generation, whether that's in managing assets or whether that's in servicing them or whether that's in providing advice to clients. And in some cases, and in many of our markets, there's a regulatory requirement to supervise those that are selling product, those that are interacting with the end investor. So I guess I'd be interested in talking a little bit about how should organizations think about maintaining and strengthening a culture of review and supervision and mentoring, and in a world that perhaps is not going to be all in person like it used to be.
Well, Dave, I'll give you my thoughts very quickly on it. I think, and I use PwC as an example to start with. You know, training, learning, development, you know, is such a huge part of what we do, and I'd like to think it never stops. Right? We're always learning, always hopefully growing, and you know, it's interesting Carol's perspective on trust. Okay, we're going to need to find a way, not just in this industry, but I would say across multiple industries, of ensuring we still hire great people, but people who are adaptable, who, you know, as we go through the stages of life, will benefit from the fact that we are likely to see a more flexible model, right? You know, we've spoken about you know, different generational preferences around flexibility in careers, and that, you know, I think we struggled with that, to be honest. I think we struggled to say, well, okay, how do we satisfy that demand for people who want flexibility when our traditional model has been, you know, it's kind of one size fits all. Well, you know what? We now know that one size does not fit all. We now know that we can be adaptable, provided the technology, and I think the technology point that we've all raised is crucial, that we know the technology works. And there's been some teething issues, you know, let's face it, and they've been in the press. I think that point around fraud and cyber risk and so on is really important. But ultimately, you want to get it to a perspective where you know you can trust really great people, and they want to learn, they want to grow, they want to develop, and the technology will facilitate that flexibility. So we wouldn't have wished this on society in any way, or on our companies and industries, but it has certainly forced us to say, well, hang on a second, we can be more flexible. People don't need to commute 2 hours a day, and we can still, there will need to be a hybrid. That point around training, I think those initial years, that review and supervision in many ways needs to be developed and nurtured, right? But I think you have to do that in a way that says the target here is to get to a position where your career model you will be more flexible than it has been in the past, and that's a really good thing. That will facilitate us to keep more of our great people, right? It will mean people don't need to commute in every single day. All of those things become very attractive.
Yeah, and I think, to that point, Andy, and Dave, as I start to sort of think about it, and as I, have various conversations with clients, I think creating optionality within the workforce and the workplace is going to be critical. I mean, we can't underestimate the enormity of the challenge of physically getting people back into the workplace anyway. And even if you can, probably only about 30% of your offices is going to be able to be filled from a capacity perspective. But I think creating that optionality where people can work at home, but let's be really clear, not everybody likes to work at home and not everybody wants to work at home. If you've got people that are living in, shared accommodation, if you've got people that are working from their bedroom, that's not an ideal situation. So how do you create an environment for them where they feel that they can still be productive and effective? And also, what we can't do is lose the power of collaboration and the power of being together to work together in teams. So I do think whilst working at home will play, I think, a large part of what the future workforce model might look like, I do think there will be optionality. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting, and I've just been working with a number of organisations, is they've created kind of committees, not just about return to work, but also about actually what the future of the workforce and workplace might look like. And that's really a collaboration between people, technology and real estate. Because actually, if you make a decision on your real estate, it has a huge impact on your people and technology. If you make a decision on your people, it has a huge impact on your technology and real estate. So, absolutely think about those collectively and think about the interdependencies and the interplays. And on your point around, making sure you're managing fraud risk, you've got supervision. I've seen the emergence of really interesting technologies coming up. Specifically around sort of remote trader, or, all sorts of different things that are in there, some which may or may not be relevant for you as an organization. But, I think a lot of companies are looking very quickly around what they can automate, what they can augment, and actually what they really need humans to do in the future. And I think a lot of investment has gone into technology for most companies, but a lot of that technology has been about back office. And I think what needs to be repivoted is how you think about the impact technology has both on the customer, but also on the people serving the customer as well.
That's great, Carol. I want to move us on to the future in a moment, but before we do that, I'd like to get your perspectives on what ways have we helped clients in the past 2 months? What are the most frequent conversations and areas of support that we've been giving? Maybe Dave, I'll start with you. You've been very involved in this for the US firm in asset and wealth management. Give us some idea of the kind of things that you and the team have been helping with.
I mean, the most recently is this concept of contact tracing and helping, understand how to better deal with a future illness in the workplace. We had workplace illnesses that happened in March, and ultimately everybody got out of the office, and you had to go to this full-time remote. Contact tracing is the ability to be able to maybe quarantine a smaller group of people and yet maintain your business operations and really be able to fully understand, what sorts of risks you're running when you do reopen your workspace, however much capacity you work on. So that's probably been the most recent one. Of course, before that, I think there's opportunities in the market. If you're a distressed investor, there are new opportunities for you to raise funds and thinking about, and there has been in the United States, there's been an enormous amount of fundraising around distressed opportunities. There is a big swath of this economy that have gone to zero revenue. Transportation, entertainment, the aviation industry, and so there are distressed opportunities that investors are looking at, and we're helping them think about new funds and new investing opportunities. I'd say those are two items, Andy, in the last little while.
That's great, Dave. And Carol, from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think initially a lot of it was really working with companies and thinking about their workforce, specifically in some of those industries that were massively impacted. So actually, what would they be doing with their workforce? Would they be furloughing? Would they be putting reduced hours? How did they move certain parts of the workforce from areas where they weren't busy to areas of high demand, for example? So really thinking very holistically around what the options were for their workforce, both in the short and medium term. And I think it's fair to say, actually, making sure that they put what I would call a purpose lens through that. So don't make very short-term decisions that could hinder you in the medium to long term. But also, everybody's on show and everybody's on trial. So the decisions you make today will be enduring and long-lasting. So make sure that you feel confident and comfortable that you are making the right decisions. I think it's then really very much moved on to helping clients kind of identify the skills that they need quite often immediately. So we need to pivot all these people into a different area where we've got high demand. Actually, do these people really have the right skill sets? So how do we assess those skill sets? And then how do we upskill those people in a virtual world at speed to make them effective as quickly as possible? And we've then really, I would say, kind of moved on to thinking about the medium to future term. So actually, what can we learn from this crisis? What can we take that will be really positive for us as an industry? And how do we accelerate our workforce transformation? Thinking about, as I said before, the real estate impact and also the technology impact. And where do we invest that's going to have the biggest benefit? I think there's a lot of work we're also doing around mental health and well-being. I think that's a particular issue for companies, and it's particularly challenging for people who aren't used to or really struggle to work in a remote environment. So, so we've been doing quite a lot of work with companies around that. So a whole myriad of different things. I mean, the other thing for me that's been really interesting is a lot of companies have really struggled with kind of just accelerating their diversity and inclusion agenda. So, it's always been really important to them, but they've really not made huge inroads. And actually, I do think, one of the outcomes may be that this really helps accelerate that for companies. And the reason I say that is because if you take away the physical need for everybody to be in the office, if you take away the geographical need for everybody to be within a certain radius of an office, you suddenly open up the possibility to source your talent from all sorts of different places, either in country or outside the country. And I also think from a social mobility perspective, it could potentially be, a real help. So I know some companies are starting to think about that, not just about how they're going to work in the future, but also actually how they use it to accelerate things like diversity and inclusion.
Superb, Carol. And Carol, maybe let's use that to move into the future, right? To talk about where there's this, clearly the immediate return to work protocols and challenges, but we're clearly seeing in each of our economies around the world baby footsteps, perhaps, or certainly early stage, certain industry beginning to return. Do you want to talk about that, what you're seeing, and lead that conversation for us?
Yeah, so I mean, everybody is now, thinking about return to work and what it might look like and what it might mean for them. And I think, excuse me, what's really clear is that the only way out of this is a guaranteed vaccine, and that's not there anytime soon. So, companies are hugely concerned about the welfare of their employees. Employees are hugely concerned about putting themselves at risk. So, we're not going to see an immediate return to work anytime soon. So I think, and most companies are really following the WHO guidelines and also following the guidelines from their local governments. I think what's really interesting, even in Europe, we're seeing a very different approach depending on which country you live in, and also depending on the impact that COVID-19 has had on your population. But actually, when you think about return to work, you know, what I would say is think about a number of things. So what are the critical skills you need that have to be in the office? What are the critical people you need that you want to be in the office? So that might be people that generate revenue, for example, that it will be much harder for them to do virtually. So how do you get them back into the market? But the other thing is, what are the people that are most vulnerable within your organization that really struggle to work remotely? And how do you create a safe environment for them to come back? So lots of discussion around that. Also around how you reconfigure your workspace, because actually, you know, offices, and I think most companies are looking at collaboration spaces. I heard a stat the other day that France seemed to be buying huge amounts of perspex for some, you know, in France particularly, because they think they can perspex everything off, and that will kind of create some contained spaces. So, you know, we don't have the answer to everything, but everybody is going through that journey. But everybody also recognizes that this is not a short-term issue. This is going to go on for a period of time. And even if we get over this issue, there's probably another issue going to hit us in a couple of years. So actually, what changes we make today, how do we sustain those for the future? And also, you know, the return to work, you know, what are the things we're most worried about? If we're most worried about supervision, if we're most worried about fraud, how do we look at those areas and make the right decisions and the right investments to kind of minimize the risks in those spaces, whether that's through additional training, whether that's through additional supervision, whether that's through different technology. So a number of different things that people are looking at. But also, I think very much around, there's going to be, you know, the stats we're seeing, you know, 48% of companies that we survey, there's going to be a huge acceleration of automation and digitization, because there is still far too much that people do that actually they don't need to do, can either be augmented or automated. So how do they accelerate that?
That's great, Carol. We'll come back to that, but I think that's fascinating. It's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity for the industry. And I think I've heard you speak about new world, new skills, digitization of the workforce as something that was down the road. Now it's here. Now it's today. And in many ways, it has forced the industry to accelerate things it probably should have been doing already. Dave, your thoughts on that from the US perspective, and what you're seeing with your clients?
Yeah, look, I think we see a total acceleration of the existing trends that were hitting this industry. And if you think of both technology transformation and the workforce of the future, I think on both of those, continued investment in automation technologies, you know, AI and machine learning to help identify anomalies in data, to help make investment decisions. I think you see robotics used in processing of transactions from trade to recognition in a set of financial statements, all the way end to end, or in a shareholder report. I think you'll see you know, continued focus on upskilling people to be able to interact with those technologies. But you know, I also think that adding to both the technology transformation and the workforce is things like remote technology, being able to do those kinds of things from a laptop on a kitchen table, I think is important, and being able to be able to manage large swaths of data from remotely. And how do you build a technology to deal with that? So that's now a new one to be added to technology transformation. On the workforce of the future, I think you have to add workplace resilience. You know, what does your workplace look like? Could you, you know, could you shut down an entire floor and still operate? You know, those kinds of things that maybe weren't as high on our priority list probably need to come into the equation, but it doesn't change the trend that both technology transformation and upskilling a workforce is really important to this industry as we look forward.
Interesting. I'd like your thoughts on something that we're seeing in Ireland, and I think it would apply to the UK and US and elsewhere, which is, in addition to the work from home dynamic, it's also some industry folks saying, hang on a second, now that we know we don't have to have thousands of people all congregating in a single city center location, right? Regional hubs become an offering, right? And someone coined the phrase work from regions, right? What are your thoughts on that? Do you see that as a trend, or do you think that is, so I'd like to explore that with you. Maybe Carol, I'll start with you. Thinking about London, the amount of people coming in and out of London every day, do you see working from regions becoming something that might catch on?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. I mean, I think, when we talk about sort of optionality within how you work, not physically having to go to a central place, but actually being able to go somewhere where it's more local to you, I think will be quite important. I mean, we at PwC actually have done some postcode analysis. So we know from a London perspective that people physically don't want to get on the London transport system because they are very concerned, and they will remain concerned for a long period of time. But we also know that some of those people do need somewhere to go because they need to have that engagement and that collaboration. So, looking at kind of postcode analysis for your employees and your workforce, and then thinking about how you use space in those areas to allow people to congregate and come together when they need to, I think will definitely be, something that a lot of companies will be considering. I also, it's really interesting. I dug out an article that I remember reading in 2014, and I thought it was incredibly forward thinking, but actually I dug it out the other day. It was an article written in Forbes, and it was based on American Express and their model for work. And it had the concept of club, hub, home, and roam. And that was very much around kind of the club was sort of the main office. The hub was effectively a regional type area where people could go to very close to their home. The home obviously was home working, and the roam is where you're out seeing clients. And I think what American Express were doing at the time was actually segmenting their workforce into those four. I would say that if we evolved that further, you could see people having the option of doing any one of those potentially. So I do think we will see different models evolving, but ultimately it's got to be right for you and your organization. And, it's got to meet your clients' needs and your people's needs. So I do think we will see a lot more optionality in the future.
Yeah, I would add, Andy, look, we've had this mega trend going on for a number of years now around the movement back to cities and the urbanization. And we see people moving back into the cities to get access to technology, to get access to social connections, to get access to all number of great things. And I think many of the cities have seen a rise in their populations, an investment in infrastructure. And the question that you have to ask is, does this crisis, this COVID-19, change that megatrend? And I'm not so sure it does. We have a great younger workforce who I think have gravitated towards living in cities more than I did when I was their age. And I think we see that continuing. And so perhaps the regionalization approach, having multiple locations in a region, or New York or Boston or London or Dublin, would be a way to manage that workforce and yet still take advantage of a workforce that is looking for an urban environment and wanting to live in an urban environment. And so I do think there's real possibility for that.
Yeah. And I think to Carol's point, it's optionality, right? And, if the technology, and you make the point around review and supervision, if all of that means actually you can have that optionality, you would think it's a win-win, right? It should be a win for the business. You get to attract and keep fantastic people. You probably need a somewhat smaller, we could debate the percentage, but a somewhat smaller center of city footprint over time, right? And your people hopefully are happier and more productive and have a bit more balance in their day. So yeah, it's a great theme, and I'm sure we'll hear more of this. I was keen to get your perspective because it's something we've seen some of the kind of industry promotion agencies outside of Dublin here in Ireland talk about, that actually, because the transport system's under pressure, commuting distances are long, you know, we can find some solutions to this, and I think that conversation is going to continue. Let's move on, if we could, to the future state of the industry. Where do we go from now? This incredible industry that we're all part of, and clients that we support. Dave, I might start with you, if that's okay. You know, you and I talk about this a lot. We've done some research on it together. Give me some big points here, big talking points.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the requirement for asset managers to continue to provide value for money and being strategic in their thinking, sticking to their core competency, and looking at ways to differentiate themselves in the marketplace for investors is probably the underlying foundation that we see in the future. I mean, and everything kind of builds off of that. I do think ESG, which is a product innovation that we see across the world, is probably going to get you know, additional sunshine in the future here. And do investors' buying habits become more socially conscious? Is it because of the COVID-19 crisis, or is it just a matter of time for that to happen? I don't know, but I do think that's an area of continued investment, and certainly a way for a manager to differentiate itself if it can find a way to provide return in an ESG context. So I think that's probably the foundation that we see, you know, as an enabler for asset managers to succeed in the future.
Yeah, tremendous. I agree with all of that, Dave. And listen, from Europe, we see the very same thing, right? And that focus on ESG, doing in a way that delivers, you know, the end return, the desired output for the investor, transparency around the investing process, clearly hugely important, but also being aware of all three of those, the environmental, social, and governance perspective. And one thing I've certainly felt the industry has done well, from what I've seen, is the governance over the past couple of months, how decisions are taken, transparency with regulators, transparency with auditors. Clearly, in our audit roles, we've had daily conversations with our clients about how they're doing, how they're managing their challenges, and they've been very open with us, in my experience. So I think all of that points to, and it may sound a bit of a cliche, but you know, to a world in which transparency and thinking about broader society, as we're all in this together, becomes ever more important. Carol, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we launched New World, New Skills on the 1st of October last year, really, you know, thinking about kind of the skills people have today and not necessarily the skills they need for the future. I think that topic has been accelerated, but the one area that we focused very heavily on was, it wasn't just about upskilling people that were currently in employment. It was really working with governments and other organizations to help reskill people who currently can't participate in the digital age. I think, you know, potentially what COVID-19 is going to do is create that divide, which is even bigger than it is today. You know, we're seeing quite significant rises in unemployment. And for me, if we think about a company's purpose, and if we think about the right thing to do, it would be great for us to not just focus on our own people and upskilling them, but actually how we come together with other organizations, with industry bodies, and also with governments to actually think about the broader societal piece and how we enable people to get the skills they need to actually participate in the world of work tomorrow.
Carol, I'd like to unpick that just for 1 minute. How do we do that? That will be unfortunate that the digital skills divide gets bigger. What steps do you think we should all be taking, governments should be taking possibly to address that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, there's things that are happening globally. You know, if you look at the World Economic Forum, if you look at UNICEF, they've already got big programs in place. My view is you actually need to do things at a country level, but also at a local level as well. You know, so we've done a number of things at PwC where we get into our communities, where we help reskill teachers, for example, to enable them to be more effective in the classroom, where we're going into certain areas in the UK and helping provide digital skills so that people can actually become employable. But doing that on our own is not going to touch the side. So if we can come together with industry bodies and other organisations and with governments, You know, we're spending quite a lot of time with governments across Europe, actually, talking about some of the real challenges that governments are going to face in terms of social security benefits they're going to have to pay out. And how do you help drive those skills and get those people back into employment quite quickly? So, you know, there's a number of campaigns that we're leading around Europe, but around the world. But actually, my view is the more we can come together and collaborate, the more we can get people into the workforce, then the better it's going to be for everybody.
That's great, Carol. And that's great to hear about what we're doing with teachers in schools. And I know there's lots of organizations we partner with who specialize in that, and that just is so important. And it sounds as if it's going to be more important than ever. So that's tremendous, Carol. Dave, I'm conscious of the time. I think we're out of 40 minutes. I better keep us honest here. Any final thoughts, Dave, from you as you look forward that you want to share with everybody who's tuning in?
I would just say that I think we've got huge opportunities, you know, for the future. Carol made a comment around, you know, governments needing to provide for Social Security for their citizens. I mean, asset managers and their providers around them are more important now than probably ever to sort of help us through this and to provide the kind of asset levels we're going to need to have, you know, functioning societies in the future. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for firms now that maybe we're not totally through the crisis, but we've found that we can deal with it. And now let's move on to building those kinds of investment opportunities for the customer base that, you know, desperately needs them.
That's tremendous, Dave. Carol, any final thoughts from you?
No, I mean, the final thought from me is, you know, where you are investing in technology, make sure you invest in your people and upskilling them too.
Great, Carol, thank you. So this has certainly been a different way of speaking to hopefully a number of hundred people. I'm not sure how many people will ultimately get to see and listen, but I've really enjoyed it. It's been great exploring how we've all got past, you know, and got through the past couple of months. We're not out of it yet. But, you know, I'm certainly very proud of what everybody in PwC has done and our clients and indeed the broader industry. And I think that human perspective has been really important. Huge thanks to you, Carol, and you, Dave, for being with us today. As always, we're very happy in PwC to take any questions, either directly to myself, Carol, or Dave, or more indirectly to your own contacts within PwC. And we look forward to continuing the conversation in other ways and to hopefully working together as we emerge from this and look to support society beyond this. Thank you all, and we look forward to talking again. Thank you.